So I haven't been too personal about most of the things on this channel, but I'm going to say that one thing on a somewhat personal note, it has been fairly repulsive. This reception that reads what I'm doing, my methodos, I'll call it, or path, as merely casual. It's not that because I've been studying full time for more than a decade. So, but the reason I give that impression, I think, chiefly is because my attitude towards the methodos is that not in some generic way am I always starting out anew, but rather it's that I can't find a ground. So I feel myself always, I start with something and I move in it as much as I can, but then I see it turn around in another angle. So um, I think partly this is part of the fundamental experience of philosophy. Just for instance, in uh, Plato's drinking party or symposium, you have to move around and you see the different sides of Eros, right? And then Eros goes from the lowest, as Plato would understand it, because it's that which is compelled by the bodily passions, to the highest, to that which compels us to agathon, or the good. So there's and then we have words for that, like I don't know, epistemic drive or something along those lines today. But the point is that it's a serious difficulty that we're just sweltering around constantly, and it's obvious if you want something that's ready packed, like encyclopedia. If you want something that can be presented, here are the points. Here's the you're in a classroom, and here's the paideia, and learn it, memorize it, recite it, and then 30 years go by, and you're still playing out the script. So, for instance, there's always some ideas that are being produced, and they're produced at a level where the professors don't readily discredit themselves with the teachers, and they can produce a course, and the course can be very slick, and it can be um, presented in a powerful way. And so, for instance, many things that are in such courses are widely and almost universally accepted. So, for instance, that some form of feminism, at least in the basic sense of the right to vote and equal representation. And then you come up with, for instance, in the law, I know someone who's a product of the law schools from about 30 years ago or so, American law schools, elite law schools. So they have a notion, for instance, that if you bring about a form of elections, which are called the equal proportion election system, which they have in Australia and in some other countries in Europe, you'll immediately get a higher amount of representation for women, because the idea is that women will vote for women, and they'll be able to do this if the incumbents are not allowed to use their entrenched positions to not get knocked out of the position. This would mean in America that you would get rid of the districts, which would also obviate all the problems of with gerrymandering, which are so plaguing the Supreme Court and the country in recent years, or seemingly plaguing. But in any case, I give that to say that there's programs which can be presented, which are very cogent and which almost everyone may agree are good, but we don't actually know what the results are. And so then you start with something like that, and you think about it. What happens is people pick up this, which is a paideia, when you, or an education, and they live in it. So they live it out for decades and decades, and then maybe they successfully bring off some of these programs, and then they say, "We've done it. We've progressed. And they're actually following out instructions which they've received from their teachers. How do the teachers actually know that's good? Maybe they are good, maybe they're not. So we get into a situation where the problem I have with the teachings like that is basically that it's a sort of somnolent condition where we're reduced to the state of being animals, and often people carry out these teachings for the whole of their life, and they don't even really question them in any serious way. For me, I can't do that. I see always that there's something else going on. So it's true that sometimes in the course of what I'm doing, I fall into things that are similar to misspellings or slip-ups in a sloppy sort of way. But it's partly because it follows from being in constant question of the ground that I'm moving from. So, I mean, one idea. I mean, one issue is take find some concrete in this for a second. What is paideia? What is paideia supposed to mean? How was that originally stumbled upon? So if you look at the laws, Plato's laws, you get a very high and quote-unquote idealistic view of what paideia is. Education in the most beautiful sense. But what is it in the simple sense? It's something analogous to the way we were talking about in an earlier recording, that you can have something like an aristos. Aristos means something like Ivanka Trump or something, an elite who represents the best, so-called best people in the society, but in a way where you say to yourself, are those really the best? And then you can build some other notion. Oh no, the best are actually people like Laura Deming or so, who are doing science, because science is the most authoritative thing in the world. But then you question yourself. For Leo Strauss, for instance, it was enough to say there's such a thing as the atomic bomb. So therefore we can't say, and in biology itself, there's such a thing as DARPA. There's such a thing as increasing the lethality of nanotechnology in the biological sciences. So you had nanobots going through the bloodstream, annihilating people, the gray goo, and so on. So, I mean, all these things can be brought into a more fundamental level of question, so far as we talk about yay saying and nay saying to them. That would be one way we can stop. Heidegger says that human being is a yay sayer and a nay sayer. We can stop and try to orient ourselves with any of these notions. The human being is a yay sayer and a nay sayer. It sounds pretty cogent. It sounds like we can orient ourselves from that point and then look from that point. Zizek will come out with something like, recently I've been thinking of this, Zizek has this interpretation, which I think is probably faulty, but I haven't read Freud seriously in 20 years, but I think just thinking of Freud's citation of Plato, the well-known citation of the Politeia or the Republic, of the unconscious, of the Greek, and connected to Oedipus and all these things which appear in the psychoanalytic talk. Zizek tries to turn the Freudian unconscious into what he calls I'll gloss as reference point unconscious. So how does Zizek work there? He says that the unconscious it has no depth. It's just this slight move, and you could say. This as Zizek speaks about his Ernst Lubitsch example of the coffee without milk or coffee without cream. We can speak of he gives these examples of all the things, coffee without caffeine. So you could, I was thinking Zizek is kind of entertainment without guilt, because he's entertaining, but usually entertainment, you feel like you're stupefying yourself. So he's entertainment without guilt because he seems to be presenting something that's worthy in some way. But then this punctuates somehow that entertainment as idea or eidos has to be distinguished over against something else. This question of you see how this all swirls around. It's very difficult to stay with one reference point if you're open to it. So for instance, Leo Strauss says, as we get older, we become less rigid, which may surprise some people, but maybe in extreme old age, people become, rigid again, but maybe on the other hand, they just become a higher proof of their own whiskey, as I heard somebody say the other day. And that could mean even more open to the sluice or to the free falling of it all. So what I want to say is these presentations, even if they're in some sense expressionistic, are nonetheless representative of a real datum, of a phenomenology, in the sense that phenomenology, in the first sense, merely means that we state something that somebody who hears it can possibly gain a genuine relationship to, such that they can move in it, understand it. If you have an experience with another person that's unusual and they experience it with you, they can relate to it, you can talk to them, they get it. This is what I mean by a relationship to what's being said. So the phenomenology is like that. It tries to show paths in thought which we can build a relationship to in some way, and then we can enter into it ourselves, and this in contradistinction to making statements which then we could call arguments, and then saying somebody has laid these down, and are they sound or not, are they true or not, and then we can judge them either by the scale of let's say oratory or the polis, where we try to get people, whether or not they're true, we want to ask really fundamentally, do people yea say to them, or do they nay say to them? We want to try to get people to go along with something or to go against something, or we orient ourselves by saying, no, but there's also this other thing, quote unquote science, and in science it's not merely a matter of yea saying or nay saying, but it's rather a matter of whether the thing's true or false. The more one goes into the tradition, the Western tradition, the more one sees there's a bewildering array of orientation points. There's a bewildering array of places where we could try to bring ourselves into contact. On this score, I think Zizek, with his jokes, the jokes are one point where you could possibly make a connection to Heidegger, in that you could say getting a joke is like what Heidegger is trying to do with phenomenology, because you're in that. If you get the joke, then you're in the space of the joke, and you have a relationship to what's being said in a special way in time. And this is the Vorhandenheit, in the sense that you're really in the it's not just that the thing's ready to hand, you're there with something. The joke he was telling that I thought was quite characteristic was the one, I forget the name of the, well, it goes something like this. It's there's a debate, and there's a sort of a rightist communist about in the 30s or so. I forget the name of it. There's one of the big communists died in 38 or so, and he was of the opinion that, and the question, but in any case, the question is asked, will there be, there's this question, will there be money in perfected full communism? Unlike, socialism, maybe that's the stage, and then you got to another stage which perfects it, and then will there be money in the final stage? And then the one guy says, his name starts with a K, I forget, but in any case, it doesn't matter. He says, yes, of course there'll be money, because money is natural. He takes kind of like a Catholic, right-wing, conservative view there, of course, in relationship to this question of will there be money in the Marxist sense. There must be money, because money is natural, and property is in some way natural to the human being. So of course there'll be money. And then some whoever is the remnants of Trotsky, who's still around at that time, takes up the other position, and they say, no, there can't possibly be money. Money is alienation. Alienation is the rudimentary evil that we've been trying to scrub out for the whole of history. And then Comrade Stalin, people they turn enormously towards Comrade Stalin, who was braced on the edge of speaking, and then Stalin utters the words, no, there'll be a dialectical synthesis, there'll be both. And then there's a lot of chattering, and people are excited, and they say, "But how can it be? How can there be both?" And then Stalin answers, "Because there'll be rich people, they'll have money, and there'll be people that don't have money. So there'll be people that have." I messed up the punchline a little bit. There'll be people that have money. There'll be people that don't have money. So Zizek says he likes the sudden turn to the vulgar in that. I think there's something there in the expression of jokes in Zizek and in this notion of the mere punctuated unconscious, the mere reference point unconscious, where you make things different only by changing something in what you're talking about, right? That's very much like how Heidegger works. It's very subtle where it's happening, that thinking is happening, because thinking is absolute thinking. The thing that stands still, as I would gloss it, is absolutely the same as the things that move. How do we and this is like the problem of the river and the waters, or the tree and the accidents of the tree, everything that's in the tradition, but it's taken not from the angle of the soul being active and acting on things, and the world taken for granted of being outside. So it's not from the inside to the outside, but it's taken from the point of view of simply time is flowing, and we don't even